Guys, we've got a great speaker this morning for you, John Bishop. John has been with us before and has spoken at other NCS chapters, a storied career in real estate and philanthropy, specifically in that regard, a graduate of the Naval Academy and spent time serving in Vietnam. And as I said to you earlier, thank you for your service. Why don't you come up and I will give us a quick prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you. We thank you for today. We thank you for the opportunity to be in your presence and to be gathered with these men and to hear the good words of this man, John Bishop. I ask that our ears be open and our hearts be open to the message we're getting this morning. In the name of your son, Jesus, amen.
Amen. Well, good morning. I want to thank Chip and Nick and the folks that arranged for me to be invited to come up here and share a few thoughts with you. And I also want to give you greetings from Jim Lane. I talked to Jim yesterday, and he thinks often and fondly of this group, so he sends his greetings. A little bit about my story to set the context for some thoughts I want to share with you. I came to faith in Jesus as an 18-year-old kid in the military, and the nearly 12 years that followed was spent learning about war at the Naval Academy, training for war in the Marine Corps, going to war in Vietnam. So my whole early journey with Jesus was shaped by warfare. And it's given me a set of lenses, a perspective on how I view life and the world. And so I want to share some thoughts out of what I have observed and experienced and what I think is becoming increasingly relevant to our lives today. The first thing I'd like to share, men, is that we are all wounded and broken men. Every one of us. We're wounded from the fall, for sure. Sadly, many of us have been wounded by the sins of others. And of course, we're wounded by our own sin and folly. And that's a huge issue that burdens most men, is the reality of these wounds, and they live from their wounds. And so what I want to do is pass something around as a tangible visual aid of this great truth. This is a Purple Heart medal. I don't know how many of you are familiar with these. These are the medals that we award to those who are wounded in action, WIA, and to the next of kin of those who are killed in action. This is the only medal that we award our soldiers for true sacrifice. We have medals for service and for heroism, but this one is for sacrifice. So what I want to do is pass this around. I'd like you to grip it for a second or two or whatever. And while you're gripping it, I'd like you to ask the Lord to show you one of those moments of where that wounding took place. Because Jesus earned two of these when he was here. He was wounded for our transgressions, and he was killed in an action at the cross. And he wants to do for us what was done for him, which is transform our wounds into our scars. And so this is the journey I want to take us on this morning of how we get healing and how we get our stories fixed, okay? So let me pass this around and just grip it. Ask the Lord to show you one thing so you can connect at the ideas that I'm going to share with you. Most of us do not have an accurate sense of this cosmic battle in which we're engaged. Men, we're born and born again into a world at war. And I can verify that or sort of justify that by going all the way back to the garden. When God planted the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden, he was telling us that evil existed. Otherwise, that tree doesn't make sense. And he planted the tree before he created Eve. So evil did not get brought into the culture, into the creation with the fall of Adam and Eve. It happened before. So all of creation, everything that we're engaged in, is in the context of warfare. I'm saying the gospel is a war story. Yes, it's a love story, but it's a love story set in the middle of conflict. So give you a feel for this, of how much this is on the heart of Jesus. You typically know what's on a person's heart when you listen to them pray. That's a moment of real vulnerability. In the Lord's Prayer, he teaches us to pray, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. That's the correct translation of Matthew 6:13. Then over in John 17:15, he says, I do not pray you take them out of the world. I pray you protect them from the evil one. Now, guys, when the scriptures repeat things, it's important. I want to lobby pretty hard that where this gets repeated adds to its importance. There are only two things that Jesus repeats in his prayers. The name, hallowed be thy name. And in John 17, he says, I have kept them in your name. And this issue of warfare. In the military, every fighter pilot's got a wingman. Every ranger's got a ranger buddy. Every SEAL's got a swim buddy. Every soldier's got a foxhole buddy. Every Marine has a fire team. We do not send men into battle by themselves. It's just not done. And I believe that's why Jesus sent his men out 2 by 2, because he knew what he was sending them into. And when you read the scriptures and hear the stories of when they got sent out, one of the first things they did was cast out demons. They engaged in this warfare right from the very beginning. So this is very much on the heart of Jesus. The question is, in this battle and in our wounding, how do we get healing? How does that take place? Well, in Jesus, everything is the opposite. You know, you lead by what? Serving. First by being last. Get by giving. Everything in Jesus is the opposite. Well, in the warfare, we have a thing called the $1 million wound. It's a wound that's bad enough to get you out of the battle, sent home, but not bad enough to disfigure or disable you. That's a $1 million wound. So you get healing by getting out of the battle. We all start this with a $1 million wound because we're wounded. And the way we get healing is to get in the battle. And we get in the battle by allying with Jesus in his agenda. His agenda in 1 John 3:8 is to destroy the works of the devil. So all of us are called at some level to ally with him in the destruction of the works of the devil. This is a big deal, guys. Very big deal, because most of us are not engaging at that level. Any chance I get. So how do we do this? What are the specific ways that we engage in this battle in destroying the works of the devil? In Ephesians, it says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And then over in 2 Corinthians 10, thank you. Then over in 2 Corinthians 10, it says the weapons of our warfare are not flesh and blood. We have weapons designed for engagement in this cosmic battle between good and evil. So I want to give you a definition of weapon to give you an idea of what I think Paul's talking about. A weapon is anything you can use that destroys your enemy's ability to wage war against you and others. That's a weapon. So when you come into this spiritual battle, I always start with the same two. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is a weapon. And I'd venture to say most of you have not framed or heard forgiveness, or get forgiveness framed as a weapon. But when we forgive, we're destroying Satan's ability to wage war against us, to anger and bitterness and revenge, alienation. We are taking the fight to him through forgiveness. The second weapon is generosity. When we're generous, not just with our money, but with our life, our words, our behavior, our relationships. When we're generous, particularly with the money issue, we destroy Satan's ability to wage war against us through the love of money and the deceitfulness of riches. So generosity is another way to take the fight to the enemy. And I always start with those two because they're two of the four cornerstones of God's love. God's love gives, and God's love forgives. So if you want to be a lover, then be a giver and a forgiver. When I was in Vietnam, I carried an M16 and a 45, and my Marines carried hand grenades. Those are typically individual weapons. But we also had a thing called crew-served weapons, CREW, tanks, machine gun, artillery, helicopters, mortars, where it took a team to operate those weapons. Well, in this spiritual battle, this thing that Chris just mentioned, the energy groups, the little groups, now become a spiritual weapon. And these little groups, men, today are more important than I think they've ever been. Because when you're in a little group, you're destroying Satan's ability to wage war against you through isolation and loneliness. And most men make bad decisions when they're isolated and lonely. And you're part of a community, you're part of a network, maybe even some of you are part of this epidemic of isolation and loneliness. So when the energy group is mentioned, I want to underscore that. In fact, I want to go a little further. I want to change the name. I think the idea of a fire team or squad is going to capture more of the heart of where guys are in this sense of being called into this battle. So I just toss that out as something to think about. But in these small groups, this is where we begin the process of fixing our broken stories. Remember, we get healing by getting into battle, not out of it. Well, we're all got a broken story, and the way you fix a broken story is you embed it in a greater story. And by coming together in a little group, the first thing you should do, obviously, is pray in Jesus' name, because he said, if two or three get together in my name, I'll be there. But the key issue in that little group is tell your stories. Tell people about your childhood. Tell people, share with that little group about your wounding, your failures. Bring your story into the little group. And as you begin to do that, that process of bringing your story into the little group is kind of the opening the door to then embedding those stories into the greatest story that's ever been told. That's what we have an opportunity to do. All of us want to participate in something greater than ourselves, and this is the way we do it. We participate in taking our stories and bringing others with us into the greatest story that's ever been told. That's the thrust of this little group. This idea of doing things together, there's such this epidemic of isolation. It's part of all of our growth, because we had everything John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, I'll do it my way. It's a part of our culture. And so what we're offering, or what we're dealing with here, is an opportunity to really engage the culture at a whole different level. And I would lobby pretty hard that most churches are not able to do this. It takes a group like this getting together and taking this back out into your network. I'm trying to think through a couple of things on specifics. I like to get guys together, like I say, tell your stories, share these things. By the way, one of the things I'd encourage you to do when it comes back to this weapon of generosity, share your money. How many men know what your net worth is? How many men are working with you and you working with them to steward the resources God's given you? In Acts 1-4, everybody knew what everybody else had. Money has become part of what isolates men. So part of getting together is, I would say, is share your money, but also share why you work. What are the things that drive your decisions relative to where and what you do for work? Engage at that level, because the deepest part of every man's soul is how they relate to their work and their money. And when I say that, I base it on Genesis, two passages, Genesis 2:5, where it says there was no shrub or herb or plant to cover the ground because God had not yet sent the rain. And then this little phrase, and there was no man to work the ground. 10 verses later, he puts Adam in the garden, and the first command to Adam was, work the ground. So our most fundamental dynamic as men is to work, to partner with him, to be with him, to share with him, to engage with him in what he's doing as he works in the world. But share that in the group. Why are you working? What are the things that motivate you? What inspires you? What do you dream about? But why you do it, and then share the resources that he's given so you can steward this stuff together. And that comes back to what Chris is talking about in terms of how this organization gets funded. I would encourage you to do this, but don't do it by yourself. We do a lot of giving and generosity when we do it individually. Rather, get together with a few guys, think through this, pray through this, engage in it, and engage in it together. It's a whole different way of thinking about stewardship. I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions, but here's what I would like for you to do. When you leave here, I'd like you to walk humbly, but I'd like you to walk boldly. But most of all, I'd like you to walk together. Semper Fidelis.
Thank you, John. I'll ask a few questions and we'll turn it open to you guys. What do you think what are some things that civilians, like most of us, don't really understand about real combat?
Real combat is, in my thought, kind of the ultimate reality, because it's life and death. And one of the things that you experience, particularly when we train in the Marines, our Marines learn how to love each other to they're willing to die for each other. And I think that's part of the call that Jesus has for us, just as people. This is, greater love has no man than he laid down his life for his friends. So this is part of what it means to come together, is to learn how to love the Lord for sure, but learn how to love one another.
Did they actually use that word in the Marines? Love each other?
You know, it's interesting. Our demographic of recruits that come in from the country, like the Air Force and the Army, the Navy, that sort of thing. Very narcissistic, very immature. These kids need a lot of help, to be honest. Our drill sergeants can tell you, typically within a day, sometimes even more than like an hour, when those recruits shift from I to we, and from me to us. There is a dramatic, calculatable shift in our training program of how we teach young men to love each other.
That's great. So there's an inflection point where they bond and they link arms and they become a band of brothers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Say more about how we know when we're under spiritual attack. I was just facilitating a board retreat for a Christian ministry, and one of the members went home to find that a tree limb had crashed through her roof while she was away at the Christian ministry board retreat. And so her mother said, "Well, that's a spiritual attack." Is that a spiritual attack? Is it just a storm? You know, like how do we know when it's a spiritual attack?
I think, first of all, recognizing the truth of Satan's agenda. Let me ask a question. How many of you are familiar with the passage where Jesus says, "I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly"? That's the second half of John 10:10. How many of you can tell me the first half? A couple. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Man, I think the abundant life is when we get engaged in the battle to keep him from stealing, killing, and destroying. So being aware of his agenda, being aware that this is part of what we have to deal with every day, being tuned into this, being sensitive, gives us that answer.
Interesting. So, in those sort of mundane, everyday sort of setbacks and things that happen, is it the event itself that's a spiritual attack, or is it more the temptation to kind of respond to it in different ways? How do you think about that?
Actually, it's both.
You think it's both?
Both. I'll share this with you that, and this is just my processing of this thing. I think those kinds of events, suffering, trauma, those sort of negative events, come into the life of a believer for only one of two reasons. The first reason, God allows them or causes it in order to get our attention so that we will repent. It's the consequences of sin, and he wants to get our attention so we'll repent. And the other is that he gives us those things in order to mature us into the likeness of Jesus. We're none of us going to grow in our faith and in our likeness to him apart from suffering, apart from hardship, apart from pain.
Interesting. And when you think about your life, your story, how's that proven true in your life? Like how some of the hardships and challenges you've been through been used by God to shape you as a man?
Well, I'm just kind of silly, but I'm sitting here because of a lot of that. It caused me to ponder, okay, Lord, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to help me grow? What is going on? It's helping me, I think, really to ask the right questions. And then I think being able to respond based on what those questions reveal, hopefully is helping me to grow and mature and then be in a position to share things like this with other men.
And what were some of like the specific things that have happened along the way that kind of brought that lesson into focus for you?
Well, for me, the most significant one is my divorce, my failure as a husband. And then that translated to a great degree of failure with my children. And so I kind of live with that, and that's a big issue for me.
I would imagine that the forgiveness thread that you mentioned came into play in that experience too. Because I agree. I've heard you say this several times, and I think it's true. I just have never heard that forgiveness is a weapon, and I wonder how that's played out in your life, maybe even in some of these family dynamics that you've had to deal with.
Well, I had maybe after the divorce, and this is like 3 years later. And anybody who's been through that kind of knows how those post-divorce dynamics feel. And I had some friends give me a CD player, or CD, by a guy named Tom Wilson. And all of you know Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson played Biff in Back to the Future. He was the bully. But he has the most amazing tenor voice, and he's a songwriter. And he wrote a song called I Forgive You. And these friends gave it to me. We're out in Seattle, and I'd driven, so I was driving back across country. I must have listened to that CD 200 or 300 times because it was doing something in my soul that needed to be done. And by the time I got back to Annapolis, I realized there were 2 or 3 people I had to forgive, and I pondered it, and I made a decision. I will never have an unforgiving spirit for anyone, anywhere, anytime, over anything. Because that's the very thing Jesus gives us through what he sacrificed on the cross. And so that's why I see it through these lenses as a weapon. It takes the fight to him. So I went to my former wife, and 3 years later I had lunch, and I asked her to forgive me for my failure in the marriage, and left that time with a clear conscience to the degree you can have something like that. And I have maintained that.
That's really important, guys, to not miss that forgiveness isn't just forgiving others. It's also asking forgiveness.
All right.
That's really powerful, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
And I'd make a little addition here.
Yeah.
Jesus says 3 times, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive. The Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Then 2 verses later, he simply says, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive. And at the conclusion of Matthew 18:35, he basically says, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart, neither will your Father forgive you. So unforgiveness is really dangerous ground to walk. So,
Yeah, talking about you're basically giving yourself up to the enemy, I guess,
yeah, you're
in
cooperating.
the framework today.
Yeah,
That
for
we're
sure.
talking about. That's really good. What are some ways that you work with and have worked with? I mean, you were a soldier. You've worked with all kinds of guys on Capitol Hill for many years. What are some ways that you see the devil trying to kill, steal, and destroy? Like, what are some typical strategies you're seeing?
Probably the number one strategy that I'm seeing is this whole issue of deception. That's his initial weapon in the garden, deceiving Adam and Eve. And we don't realize the magnitude or the power of the deceptive forces that are out there. Advertising, particularly the media, it's egregious when you stop and think about this. And what I'm trying to say to folks when I get a chance a little bit like this is we need to take some time and process the warnings that God gives us about our behavior. He's very, very clear through a number of passages that liars are in real trouble. So when we're deceived, we're being lied to. And if we don't pay attention to that, then we wind up extending that. And there's real consequences for trafficking in the truth. And I would encourage you to read Revelation 21 and 22, Proverbs 6. There's 7 things that God hates in Proverbs 6. One's lying lips and one who bears a false witness. I mean, 2 of the 7 have to deal with falsehood, lying.
Interesting. All right, one more question for me, guys, and I'll turn it open to you. Last night at dinner, you said the Lord's Prayer is a declaration of war. I think say more about that. I think
Okay.
we'd like to hear more about that.
Remember, I'm trying to set the stage here that all of life is in the middle of conflict. We're born and born again into a world of war. When Jesus teaches us to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that's a declaration of war against the kingdom that's here. So you've got to be really thoughtful when you pray the Lord's Prayer about what you're really praying. You're praying for him and you as his ally to engage in the destruction of the kingdom that's here.
Oh, all right. Where's our mic? There he is. All right.
Thanks so much, John, for sharing your insights this morning. You mentioned the larger culture and society and how you felt a group like NCS could have even more conflict than the church per se. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about that and how we as a group of men could make positive impact in a culture that, as we all observe, has a lot of disruptions right now.
I'm going to ask Chip if you'll send that in the email system, that little thing I gave you last night called The Strategy of Jesus.
From Elton.
From Elton Trueblood.
Yeah.
I think Elton Trueblood, how many have heard the name Elton Trueblood? He was, for the late 60s and early 70s, the Tim Keller or the Rick Warrens or the John Pipers of this era. And he dialed in this idea that Jesus' strategy was to empower a few men and women to love one another and to be in relationship. And he says, you're the salt of the earth. And if the salt fails, basically there's no plan B. So the idea of coming together in a little group, I think, now taps into the very strategy that Jesus has never changed. Little groups, caring for one another, sharing. These Mennonite community folks could probably give you a great testimony to what that experience is like. And Troubadour was a Quaker, so he came out of that same framework.
Hey, Sir Bishop, I'm over here, all the way over here. Thank you for sharing your insights. I definitely see where you're coming from. Now, when you opened up, you said that there were 4 weapons. You mentioned forgiveness and generosity. What are the other 2?
Those are individual weapons, and then I talked about then crew-served weapons, tanks, machine gun, artillery. So a little group that's kind of the 3rd weapon in terms of destroying Satan's ability to isolate us. But man, I would encourage it to think of things like kindness. Kindness is a powerful weapon. I'll tell you this is a story that had happened to me. I was at a conference down in Southern Virginia, and I was driving back, stopped at Cracker Barrel to have lunch. And I'm just sitting there by myself having lunch. And the store manager came up to me and said, "Sir, I want you to know your lunch has been paid for." And I thought, this is really, I've never experienced something like that. And she said, the couple is left, and the only thing they said was, I lost my grandfather last week. And I sat there and I pondered this, and then I realized I had my jacket on with the Marine Corps emblem on it. And man, I'll bet anything in the world her grandfather was a Marine. And I still get emotional when I tell that story. But it was an act of kindness, and it's affected me. And so we can be kind people, and that destroys a lot of the hurt and pain that Satan's inflicting on other people.
It's good.
Sir, thank you so much for your service and for being here today. Can you give some thoughts around prayer as a weapon? I often think about prayer as like winning the battles of the air. You know, so many decisive victories in history were because we were able to win the air. And I also often think of intercessory prayer as like calling upon the power of heaven as that air support. So do you have any thoughts around that?
Well, I think that's a great observation on your part. I particularly like the thing about close air support. You know, that fits. I think another word would be just communication. You can't win a battle. You just can't function on the battlefield unless you're communicating with the other of your folks on the battlefield with you, whether it's close air support or artillery or tanks. You've got to have that communication to be effective on the battlefield. And so prayer, I think, is that kind of communication. I would encourage you to think, though, about doing this together. Prayer is for most men, and it's a struggle for me. But when it's with a few other guys, it takes on a different dynamic. And I would do. I'm starting. I'm still learning to record the prayers so that when the answer comes, I can say thank you.
That's good.
Hey, John, thank you. You mentioned, swipe, bro.
You're not sorry.
I'm not.
Don't lie. You heard that, Parker. Don't lie.
This is the last question.
You're
too,
not
so.
sorry.
John, you mentioned that you had failed at your marriage and that you asked your wife for forgiveness. What were some of the specific things that you failed at as you look back on it?
That's a great question. And I think you learn more from failure than success. And one of the things I feel like I really failed at was to understand her as a person and her story. There was so much emotion and all this other stuff in our dating and stuff like that. I just never really took the time or had the interest or understood the importance of really understanding her as a person and what her story was. So if I had it to do over again, I would do the one thing that would dominate doing it over again is my understanding of the difference between love and like. We can love a lot of people and not like them. And when you don't understand people and you're not engaging at this other level, you wind up not liking them. So I'd put a much greater emphasis on in my relationship was, do I like this person? Just kind of like what they do, like hanging out, like talking, like walking, just like that person. And we've got a lot of marriages like mine that may have stayed together, but they don't like each other.
So thank you for your talk and for your service as well. So in the Bible, it says so many things that are just so black and white. You know, eternity matters. We should be living for eternity, but then in our day-to-day life, it's like, well, it says it, but actually in the moment, how do we do it? And when it comes to forgiveness, I'm just curious, you know, it clearly says to forgive, but when it's really, really hard, what is it that, you know, compels you to cross that bridge into forgiveness? And how do you know when you've really forgiven someone when it's really, really hard?
Well, I'd want to ponder that a little bit more, but sort of my initial response is, you do it out of obedience, if nothing else. If the emotions are not there, if there's all the things you would think would prompt you to forgive, obedience becomes the issue. And then part of that obedience is recognizing what Jesus has done for you. He's forgiven you. And whatever the pain, the hurt, whatever's caused this issue, you've got to recognize that what you did to cause his pain, you can't hang on to it. So I just would challenge it to recognize, one, he's called us to it. He's led by example. He's made it clear that it's a critical issue. And I think, and in my case, I've just made a predetermination that when I've encountered some of these situations, I've already made the decision before I got into it. I'm not going to be unforgiving towards this person. Does that help?
I have two questions. One for like interest, and then also like for your insight. What was the most common example of $1 million wound, like in real battle? And what's a good example of $1 million wound, like in spiritual battle?
Well, the $1 million wound could be anything: a bullet in the leg, shoulder, something that got you out of the battle. It was serious enough, made it need a surgery or whatever, but it didn't disfigure you or scar you, but it got you taken out of the battle. So just about any wound that would do that would be, in the military, we refer to that as the $1 million wound. I think because we're wounded from the fall, we're wounded from the sins of others, we're wounded from our own sin and folly, those kind of come together as our $1 million wound. In other words, we start with the wound, and we get that healing by getting in the battle, not out of it.
But the wound doesn't ruin us, because God's grace can heal us, and still we still have a future even though we've got our wounds.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Jason?
Yeah. Hi, John. Jason. So sometimes life just becomes, what's my next accomplishment? Or just going through the day-to-day, job, home, family. I have a sense that when someone goes into the battlefield, sees the things that you have seen or gone through, those wounds that you have gone through, that puts life a little bit more into perspective. So how has your experience on the battlefield kind of changed the way you just have a larger view of life?
Well, like I said earlier, the battlefield's ultimate reality. It's about life and death. You experience it. I was on patrol. I was like, I can't remember exactly, the fourth or fifth vehicle in the column. And the lead vehicle went over a landmine, and 7 Marines were killed instantly, including my best friend. And what I did then, and I'm trying to still do it to a degree, is compartmentalize that experience. We picked up the bodies, put them on stretchers, what was left of them, and sent them back to the base. And we went on with the mission. So it was very, very compartmentalized. And part of my growth over the years is to break down the walls of that compartmentalization. And in this case, I'm just being frank here. Bucky Egan was the guy's name, and when we had off time, we played cribbage. He taught me how to play cribbage. And I bet in the last 6 months, I've had regular thoughts about playing cribbage again. Just, well, to honor that, but to come out of this compartmentalization.
John, grace and peace. Thank you for your sacrifice. When your insight, at least I feel that when you're a parent, you kind of understand the Lord to a certain degree because we're all children of God. So what is your relationship now with your children on the fact of divorce and everything like that? But what's your relationship with your children now? And have you asked them for forgiveness?
Well, my relationship, I mean, I think I've got a good relationship with them, but it's strained across all of them. And I think, haven't really talked to them about this, but I think part of the problem is when I was raising kids, I came out of a generation where children were to be seen and not heard. So I didn't do with my kids what I would do today. When I have opportunities to teach this, I tell guys, particularly young, when you got young children or you're a grandparent, get a journal, and every time you see that child get engaged in something, gets their attention, where their sense of time disappears, or the questions they ask, or the things you see them wanting to do, journal that, write it down, and then write down every birthday gift and every Christmas gift, so that you're trying to observe how God has wired them and what gives them who they are. And then you can help them as they mature and get ready to go off to college and stuff. You're going to have kind of a feeling for what you're going to help them discover who they are. In my case, I can go back, and I remember this vividly. One of my daughters started coming back and forth to school with these. She was coloring barrettes, and she's going to school and selling them. And I didn't pick up on this. In fact, I kind of squashed it. You shouldn't be doing stuff like that, and didn't realize her signals of creativity and artistic and entrepreneurship. I just missed it. The one place that I feel like I did it right is my son. From the time he was a little kid, I got him involved in what's called Green Hornets lacrosse when he was about 5, 6 years old. And from that time, he'd come to me regularly and say, "Dad, I'm going to go to the Navy and play lacrosse. What do you think?" Macho. And so all the time he was growing up, it was, "I'm going to go to Navy and play lacrosse." As he got into senior year, I couldn't tell whether this was a son wanting to please his dad or it was his heart. So my next door neighbor at that time was an All-American lacrosse player from West Point, Tom Minow, and I got Tom to get one of the coaches from West Point to come down and watch him play. And they came back to us and said, "Yeah, we'd like to talk to him." So they invited him up to West Point for a recruiting weekend, and he came in and he said, "Dad, why do I want to do this? I'm going to go to the Navy and play lacrosse." I said, "Son, in these kind of decisions, more information is better than less." And so in January of 1995, we drove up from Annapolis to Highland Falls. And those of you up here kind of know what the weather's like in that time of the year. Everything's gray. The sky is gray, the river's gray, the landscape is gray, the buildings are gray, the uniforms are gray. I drive aboard. Man, am I glad I didn't go here. And left him off for the weekend. And then I picked him up on Sunday. And I can't remember, this is where journaling would have been a good idea. I couldn't tell whether we're in Highland Falls or still aboard the Post. I looked in the passenger seat, and I could tell my son's heart had been grabbed. I saw it. But I knew he had to make the decision because it's his life. So a week, 10 days later, he came to me and he said, "Dad, can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure, what's up?" "Well, I was thinking about that we went to West." He just kind of muttered until he could get out, "Dad, what would you think if I went to West Point?" Now I'm looking into his eyes, and I'm looking into the eyes of a young man fearful of failing his dad, disappointing his dad. So I just grabbed him, gave him a big hug, and said, "I think it'd be a great idea," because I could see his heart. And I said, "I'll wear that stupid Army hat and all this stuff." And he is a soldier. He's not a sailor. And his career in the Army is tremendous career in the Army. And one of, where's Woody? Back, got a great friend who was one of my son's battalion commanders. He was the commanding officer of the 3rd Special Forces Group, now the Chief of Staff to the Army 3-star that runs U.S. Army Special Ops. So he's had a phenomenal career because he is designed and created to be a soldier.
That's great. One more.
Sir, thank you for your service. I wanted to ask, having been in the battlefield, and also like, you were talking about us in our lives as we battle every day. You just get to some points in life when you get numb, right? The Bible says the joy of the Lord is our strength. But you get to points when you get pretty numb, or you just get to points where you're like, how can I keep going ahead, right? And I wanted to ask, what are some practical steps that you personally take? Like, for example, something like gratitude, right? Like thanking God for things. What are some practical steps you take to keep going, to not, when you're beat down, to not just be there, but to keep fighting?
Well, a couple of things. One, I would encourage all of you to begin, if you don't have already, to develop a steady habit of reading the Scriptures. The Spirit uses the Scriptures in ways that he doesn't use other things to encourage us, to help us, to strengthen us. And the second thing is, do it together. Most guys get into those kind of situations because they're by themselves. Men, you've all heard this term accountability groups. Accountability does not produce relationships. Relationships produce accountability. So I want to encourage the very spirit, the very heart of what NCS represents is that idea of being together, sharing, traveling, living with a few other guys in a covenant relationship to help each other grow, to help each other mature, and to help each other navigate those exact circumstances that we all run into.